session work, and Jeff was in bands, and then Jeff was in the Yardbirds, and then I was in the Yardbirds with Jeff.
From what I know of Jeff, he's either fixing his cars or playing the guitar, and there's no in-between for him.
Jeff Beck was one of the most talented guitar players in rock music history. He was known for his incredible skill and his ability to do things with the guitar that nobody else could do. However, he was also famous for being extremely difficult to work with. Beck was a perfectionist who had very high standards, and he didn't accept anything less than perfect from himself or the people around him. This made him unpopular with many other musicians who found him hard to deal with. Beck wasn't just technically skilled at playing guitar, he also had a reputation for having a bad temper and being very critical of other musicians. He would say harsh things that could hurt people's careers. He strongly disliked musicians who he thought were lazy or who cared more about becoming famous than making good music. While Beck created amazing music and changed the way people played rock guitar, his personality and attitude created problems with many other famous musicians. The guitar player from Surrey, England, made important albums and influenced countless other musicians, but at the same time, he burned many bridges with fellow artists. Several rock legends couldn't stand working with him because of his arrogant behavior and the way he looked down on anyone he thought wasn't as good as him. The list of musicians who had problems with Beck includes some of the biggest names in rock music history. These weren't just small disagreements about music. They were serious personal conflicts that lasted for many years and affected the entire rock guitar scene. Rod Stewart was one of the musicians who had major problems with Jeff Beck. Stewart is the famous singer with the rough, distinctive voice who became one of rock music's biggest stars. He worked with Beck in the Jeff Beck Group during the late 1960s, but their partnership ended badly. Stewart reportedly came to strongly dislike Beck because of how difficult he was to work with during their time together. The problems between them started when they were recording an album called Truth in 1968. Beck was extremely demanding and wanted everything to be absolutely perfect. Stewart had a more relaxed way of working and didn't think music needed to be so precise. According to people who were there, Stewart told other musicians that Beck was too focused on making every single note perfect, and he forgot that rock and roll music is supposed to have feeling and emotion. Stewart thought Beck was treating music like it was a math test instead of an art form. Stewart was especially angry about how controlling Beck was in the recording studio and during live performances. He wanted to develop his own style as a performer and singer, but Beck treated him like he was just another backup musician. People in the music industry said this led to big arguments between them about who should be in charge and whose name should be more prominent. Things finally fell apart during an American tour in 1969. Beck criticized how Stewart performed on stage, and he did it in front of other members of the band. This led to a big fight backstage. People who saw it happen said Stewart got so angry that he left, telling Beck he didn't need a guitar teacher who thought he was God. Stewart told Beck to find someone else to push around. After they split up, it hurt both of their careers for a while. Stewart spent years talking negatively about their time working together. He told journalists that working with Beck was like being in a band with a dictator who wouldn't let anyone else be creative. Stewart felt that Beck had turned what should have been a partnership between equals into a situation where Beck was the boss and everyone else had to do exactly what he said. Their breakup became one of the most bitter separations in rock music history. Eric Clapton had one of the most famous rivalries with Jeff Beck. Clapton was called Guide by his fans and was known as someone who played blues music in its purest form. He reportedly had deep negative feelings toward Beck that lasted for decades. The bad feelings came from professional jealousy and from what Clapton saw as Beck's pretentious way of abandoning traditional blues music to do experimental showing off. The rivalry started in the mid-1960s, when both guitarists were becoming famous in the British blues music scene. According to music historians, Clapton told other musicians that Beck had great technical ability but had lost the soul of the music. He thought Beck was treating the guitar like it was a science experiment instead of an instrument for expressing emotion. He believed that real blues music comes from personal suffering and deep feeling, not from technical experiments. What made this rivalry particularly strong was that both men claimed to be the best guitarist. Clapton built his reputation by faithfully playing American blues music the way the old masters had played it. Beck was becoming famous for what Clapton called circus tricks. Beck was using innovative techniques that Clapton thought sacrificed real emotional feeling for technical flashiness. The tension between them got worse during a recording session in 1975 when both guitarists were there. People who witnessed it said Clapton walked out when Beck started showing off his latest experimental techniques. Clapton reportedly said he came there to play music, not to watch a magic show. The feud went on for years, with both guitarists making subtle critical comments about each other in interviews. Clapton said that Beck had forgotten what the guitar was really meant for, while Beck dismissed Clapton as someone who was afraid to try new things and push boundaries. He compared Clapton to someone who works in a museum, just preserving old things instead of creating anything new. Their rivalry represented a basic split in how people thought about playing guitar. On one side was tradition, emotion, and pure blues music. On the other was innovation, technical skill, and experimental fusion music. For these two giants of rock guitar, there was no way to compromise or find middle ground.
Jimmy Page was another major guitarist who had problems with Jeff Beck. Page was the creative force behind Led Zeppelin and their powerful sound. He reportedly developed strong negative feelings toward Beck that came from their shared history in a band called the Yardbirds. Page thought Beck was arrogant and looked down on anyone he considered to be below his technical level. The bad feelings started during the time when both guitarists were in the Yardbirds, where they competed to be the lead guitarist. According to rock historians, Page told session musicians that Beck thought being technically superior gave him the right to look down on everyone else. Page said Beck confused skill with wisdom, and it made him impossible to work with. What really bothered Page was Beck's attitude toward making music with other people. Page believed in serving the song and working as part of a team. Beck reportedly treated every musical situation as a chance to show off his individual brilliance. People in the music industry said this basic difference in their approaches led to constant tension between them. The conflict became serious during a recording session in 1966. Beck allegedly criticized Page's playing in front of other musicians, which led to a heated argument about what was important in music. Witnesses say Page stormed out, telling Beck that he would rather play with musicians who understood that ego should serve the music, not the other way around. The rivalry continued even after both of them became superstars with their own bands. Page reportedly told friends that Beck had the talent of a genius but acted like a spoiled child. Music industry veterans say Page deliberately avoided any projects where Beck might be involved. For Page, Beck represented everything toxic about being a virtuoso musician without any humility. Their relationship could never be repaired. Keith Richards of the Rolling Stones had perhaps the most philosophically opposed feud with Jeff Beck. Richards is the legendary Rolling Stones guitarist who represents rock music's rebellious spirit. He reportedly hated Beck because he saw him as the complete opposite of everything rock and roll should be. Richards thought Beck replaced raw passion with clinical perfection. The hatred started in the early 1970s when both guitarists were at the peak of their careers, but were going in completely different musical directions. According to journalists, Richards told people that Beck had turned rock guitar into a science experiment. He said Beck was so busy showing off his technique that he forgot rock and roll is supposed to come from deep emotion, not from endless practice. What made Richards angry was Beck's approach to performing live and recording music. Richards represented rock's dangerous, unpredictable energy through raw power and a street-tough attitude. Beck was becoming famous for what Richards called conservatory rock. These were highly polished performances that put technical excellence ahead of emotional authenticity. The bad feelings came to a head during a recording session in London in 1973 when both guitarists were there. People who witnessed it say Richards made deliberately provocative comments about guitar players who think they're in an orchestra. Beck allegedly responded that some musicians prefer precision to sloppiness. The argument got worse until both men left the studio. Richards' contempt wasn't just about the style of music, it was a cultural war about the soul of rock music. He saw Beck as representing the intellectualization of rock, turning a working-class art form into middle-class entertainment. For Richards, who was the ultimate rock outlaw, Beck had committed an unforgivable sin. He had made rock music safe, predictable, and emotionally empty. Richards allegedly told friends that Beck represented everything wrong with modern guitar playing. He was all technique and no heart, all flash and no real substance. For Richards, rock music was supposed to be raw, dangerous, and emotionally honest. Beck's perfectionism and technical focus went against everything Richards believed rock and roll should be. Ritchie Blackmore had what many consider the ultimate clash of guitar egos. Blackmore was the theatrical mastermind behind the bands Deep Purple and Rainbow. He reportedly developed an intense hatred for Beck that defined an entire era of rock rivalry. Both men had massive egos and strong opinions about music, which made their conflict particularly fierce. The roots of their feud go back to the late 1960s British guitar scene, where both players were establishing their reputations. According to rock journalists, Blackmore told session musicians that Beck thought his technique made him better than everyone else, but he had forgotten that music is supposed to move people emotionally, not just impress them with skill. Blackmore said Beck had turned the guitar into a computer that happened to have strings. What made Blackmore's hatred particularly intense was Beck's alleged dismissive attitude toward how other guitarists approached music. Blackmore was developing his own theatrical style that combined classical music influences with heavy rock. Beck was reportedly making condescending comments about guitarists who relied on gimmicks instead of pure technical ability. The bad feelings exploded during a recording session in 1971. Beck allegedly criticized Blackmore's use of classical elements in rock music, calling it musical theater for people who couldn't handle real innovation. People who were there say Blackmore walked out, telling studio engineers that he didn't take musical advice from someone who confused showing off with artistic expression. The rivalry continued for decades, with both guitarists criticizing each other in interviews. Blackmore said that Beck was technically brilliant, but musically empty and without soul. Sources say Blackmore deliberately avoided any project where Beck might be involved. For Blackmore, Beck represented the worst aspects of musical elitism. He was technically perfect, but had no emotional connection to the music. Their feud became a battle between heart and mind that neither could win.
People in the music industry said the hatred was so intense that Blackmore would refuse to even discuss Beck in interviews. He called Beck a machine pretending to be a musician. This showed just how deep the animosity ran between these two guitar legends. These 5 musicians represent some of the most significant conflicts in Jeff Beck's career. Each rivalry reveals something different about Beck's personality and his approach to music. Rod Stewart clashed with Beck over control and creative freedom. Eric Clapton fought with Beck about the proper way to play blues and whether innovation or tradition was more important. Jimmy Page conflicted with Beck over ego and humility in music. Keith Richards opposed Beck's perfectionism because it went against rock's raw spirit. And Ritchie Blackmore battled with Beck over whether technical skill or emotional expression was more important. What all these conflicts have in common is Beck's uncompromising perfectionism and his apparent inability to respect other approaches to music. While Beck was undoubtedly one of the most talented guitarists who ever lived, his attitude made him many enemies in the music world. These weren't just temporary disagreements, they were deep, lasting resentments that shaped the competitive world of rock guitar for generations. Jeff Beck's legacy is complicated. On one hand, he was a true innovator who changed what was possible on the guitar. He influenced countless musicians and created groundbreaking music. On the other hand, his perfectionism, arrogance, and harsh treatment of other musicians made him one of the most disliked figures among his peers. These rivalries show that even the greatest talent doesn't excuse bad behavior or a lack of respect for fellow artists. The stories of these conflicts remind us that the rock music world was filled with strong personalities and competing visions of what music should be. Beck represented technical excellence and innovation pushed to the extreme. His rivals represented different values like emotional authenticity, traditional respect for blues roots, collaborative teamwork, raw, rebellious energy, and theatrical expression. None of these approaches was necessarily wrong, but Beck's apparent belief that his way was the only right way created these lasting feuds. These rivalries also shaped rock guitar history in important ways. The competition and conflict pushed all these guitarists to prove themselves and develop their own distinct styles. The tension between tradition and innovation, between technical skill and emotional expression, between perfectionism and spontaneity became defining characteristics of rock guitar. In some ways, we can thank these feuds for pushing rock guitar forward, even as they created personal pain and professional difficulties for everyone involved. Looking back at Jeff Beck's career and these famous rivalries, we see a brilliant but difficult artist who couldn't compromise or accept different approaches to music. His technical mastery was matched only by his inability to work well with others. Whether we admire his uncompromising standards or criticize his treatment of fellow musicians, there's no denying that Jeff Beck left a permanent mark on rock music, both through his revolutionary guitar playing and through the legendary conflicts he created with some of rock's biggest names.